Hey, think you know which way it's going to go? Make your bet at Sports Interaction. Whatever your sport, Sports Interaction has you covered pregame. Live betting on all major sports, and of course, prop bets. Who doesn't love those? Want to bet? Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. 19 plus. Please play responsibly.
Welcome to Nailing the Apex. I'm Tim Hauraney. Head on over to Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating. Same goes with Apple Podcasts as well. Write a review. Give us a 5-star rating over there. Helps us grow the podcast, and we'd really appreciate it. I'm on social media at Tim Hauraney. Joining me today is Dutch Motorsports reporter Jeroen Demmendaal. Jeroen has recently published a book called Formula Hopeless about backmarkers and F1 team backmarkers, actually, in the 80s and the 90s. He's been following motorsports for over 30 years. Regularly see him on our IndyCar press conference calls with the drivers, and when he's not reporting on that, you can also find his work covering the junior categories as well on Feeder Series and Feeder Series America. Both are on Twitter. Jeroen, thanks very much for taking the time to do this, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is good. Haven't seen you in a while. Last time I saw you was on the IndyCar preseason, media availability, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've all been working hard, of course, since then, just getting prepared for this season, getting prepared for that first race in St. Petersburg. And my goodness, did we get a race?
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that for a little bit because, you've been following IndyCar for a really long time and you're covering it as well. It's pretty wild to see Marcus Ericsson come away with that victory. I mean, obviously, He qualified reasonably well, but the amount of chaos at this opening race. Usually we see a little bit of it because, drivers have a lot of pent up, anger and stuff because they haven't been in a race car and racing each other for a few months. And, we got off to a pretty crazy start, Jeroen.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is, you got 27 cars, right? Which is the biggest field since, 2009? So, or maybe even longer than that.
Yeah.
So it was a very full field. And then, of course, when you have this opening crash, which really sets maybe a few nerves wrinkling. It was an unusually chaotic St. Petersburg Grand Prix. I think part of it also had to do with that, part of the track had this repave, which meant that the nature of the track had changed a little bit. There were a lot of drivers complaining about their brakes, about their getting the grip from the tires. So just by and large, there were a lot of different factors that really worked together to create a little bit of chaos.
It was interesting because, listening to quite a few of the drivers, some of them felt that they didn't get enough time in preseason testing at thermal and to get a better understanding of this. They were talking a lot about the new brake pads that they were having to run this season, and I don't know. I think they did get quite a bit of time, in my opinion, for preseason testing for IndyCar, given the fact, Jeroen, that this chassis, the car itself, it's pretty old. It's been around for a while.
Now you do wonder after a while how much is there still to discover from the Dallara, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, I can also understand because of the long off season that the IndyCar has. You might feel a little bit rusty, and then of course Thermal Club was a new track for most drivers, for actually old drivers. I think there were a handful of them who had been driving around some GT cars there back in the day. But it was a new track for them, and then they went to Sebring. And then directly after that, it's St. Pete, and you have to perform to the best of your abilities. And I think especially for some of the rookies, maybe that was a little bit trickier than they would have wanted.
Speaking of the rookies, Marcus Armstrong, man, he looked pretty good. His first IndyCar race coming home 11th, and then same with Agustin Canapino. That guy, he's been pretty impressive. Let's start with Marcus because you've covered him in junior formulas as well.
Yeah, exactly. I covered him quite a while in F3 and F2. Saw him climbing the ladder in Europe, and then of course after 3 years in F2, he then made the jump to IndyCar. I think that 11th place came including a flat tire. He did have to make an extra stop in order to fix that flat tire. So it could even have been better. Could probably have been a top 10 finish. Yes, he's in the Ganassi car. Yes, he has the European, the F2 pedigree, but still, for a kid who's never been driving on St. Pete, I think he did a really good job. As for Canapino, he is and I think most people's absolute surprise of the whole weekend. I think a lot of us might have expected him to basically be pushing up the rest of the field ahead of him, being at the bottom of the timesheets, but he never was. And he was really, really strong. Actually drove ahead of Callum Islet for a while also in the early phases of the stages of the race. And then came home basically without any issues. Didn't drive any damage. We saw a lot of drivers hit the wall throughout the weekend. He never caught any damage. And I think he's been doing a great job. And on top of that, he, as you and I have seen him on the media days, he is a very entertaining and friendly guy. This whole story what he was telling, that sort of 2-3 months ago, he didn't speak a word of English yet. And then he decided, I go to America, so I need to get myself a language coach. And then he was sitting there in our press conference and we were listening to him and we were like, this guy has spoken English for 3 months, really? Because it was near flawless. It was really, really good. So yeah, I think it's great. It's great to see him do so well. And I can't wait to see, how he's going to do on the big oval in Texas.
Stingray Robb finishing 16th. He qualified 23rd. Again, so new, right? I don't know how much time he's actually had in the car compared to, maybe Marcus and Augustine, but he's been in the junior category for quite a while. And again, you're another driver that you've covered.
That is closely. It, right? I think in terms of just testing time, he's had the same amount of time as Canapino and Armstrong. There was a preseason rookie test where all three of them were there. And if you then see, like you say, he's come up through the road to what was formerly known as the road to Indy. So he's been driving in Indy next, driving in USF Pro. So he knows St. Petersburg very well. He knows the tracks well. And then you can see, he was the one who on Friday, or actually on Saturday in practice, actually hit the wall and then sort of gave his mechanic some overtime to fix up his car for qualifying. And then, of course, on Sunday, I think he was unlucky to be caught up in that start crash.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they couldn't start working on the car until the red flag was lifted. So in the end, he was running around basically on 2 or 3 laps down, I think.
Yeah.
But then finished the race without any problems. Wasn't in anyone's way. I think he finished 16th in the end. That's fine. That's all you could have expected of him sort of after, like I said, it was a bit of a rocky start to the weekend.
Callum Islet, now 5th in the drivers' standings, are actually...
Wow.
Yeah, on the press conference with him on what was it? I think it was Friday after practice.
Friday, yeah.
And, he was asking everybody, he's like, "Why am I here?" He's like,
yeah.
I was 12th fastest. Why am I sitting in this newsroom with all of you? You should be interviewing the top 5 or whatever. And everyone's like, "No, because we requested you to come in," and he had nothing to say because he felt he did so bad in practice, and again, didn't. It was a shaky start for Juncos. Qualifying 22nd for Callum. Callum's a really great driver, very competitive, obviously. And last season, only running one car. I think this has to be one of his worst qualifying performances so far at IndyCar.
Yeah, probably. I don't know if he was sort of, hindered by anyone during Q1, but definitely. And like you say, on this Friday, he was brought into this press conference, but that sort of, it signifies his humility, right? He was like, I'm 12th. Why am I here? I didn't do anything special. And he really feels like that. But that is sort of because, he is a product of the Ferrari Driver Academy, of the FDA. Let's face it, if his last name was Schumacher, he would have been in Formula One by now. But he wasn't. Instead, Mick Schumacher went to F1 and he didn't. But this guy really has a lot of talent. Made the jump to Juncos last year, I think, at times really showed flashes of brilliance. And what he did on Sunday, really, really, really strong. To take a Juncos car, take it into the top 5. It's amazing.
Will Power, the highest finishing Penske driver, I believe, if I remember correctly, he was 7th. I think he qualified 10th. Had a really rocky week just coming into the race. Nathan Brown rode a pretty good article about all of it over on the Indy Star. And like for those who don't know, like Will's wife has been ill for the past few months, so in and out of the hospital, and it sounded like she had called 911 like a couple times during the week and lead into St. Pete. I mean, for Will to come into St. Pete, mental toughness for a lot of these drivers is a huge factor, and for Will Power, I mean it's that's got to be tough to deal with, and for him to have a pretty decent weekend, all things considered. I mean, pretty impressive.
I'm amazed that he can still perform at the level that he can, frankly. When you have indeed sort of your life partner sort of, in such a medical situation, I would be focusing only on that. And the fact that he can still go out there, do his job, and indeed sort of perform pretty well, because let's face it, I think Penske as a whole didn't necessarily have a great weekend. Newgarden was struggling. I think, of course, McLaughlin was up there, sort of, but also in the end, sort of didn't get the result. No, I'm very impressed by that, given the context, sort of, in which Will Power operated. And of course, I mean, I just hope that Liz will be fully recovered sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Will had mentioned on our media call with him on I think it was either the Wednesday or the Thursday. I can't really remember. The Wednesday or the Thursday. It was a Wednesday. That's it. Wednesday leading into race weekend at St. Pete's. He had mentioned some of the drivers that he was watching out for the most, and who he thought the drivers were going to be that were challenging for a championship. And first driver he mentioned right away was Alex Palou. Alex qualified 7th. I believe he finished 8th. I mean, when Will Power is telling you that, Alex Palou is going to be the driver that's most likely going to be battling for this championship win, I was actually a little surprised to see how far down Alex was in the finishing order. But I think it just goes to show you how competitive IndyCar is. I mean, I think like the top 10 was only separated by, what was it, like maybe a 10.5 in qualifying or something like that at the end? It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, but this is IndyCar, right? I mean, this is why we love it. The competitiveness. I mean, yes, we've had a race now, but I still don't know who's going to win this championship. I really haven't got a clue. I mean, there's at least a dozen guys out there who sort of stand a good chance, or at least an outside chance. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Palou sort of, he's over the last few years become a little bit like this silent assassin. You don't really see him all race, but then all of a sudden, there he is again, finishing second or just winning the race. In the end, it was Ericsson who sort of popped up, and actually, when some other competitors sort of fell by the wayside, he was the one who pounced and benefited from that. Whereas, maybe some of us would have expected Palou to be the guy to do that, or Dixon. But I think that also underlines sort of how strong Marcus Ericsson is. And I think sort of with Marcus Ericsson, I think he pointed at that a little bit also in his post-race interview, right? I mean, there are still people who underestimate him a little bit, who still sort of have this guy who sort of drove at the back of an F1 field in a Caterham and think like, yeah, but, is he really all that? Well, I mean, he's on top of the championship right now. I mean, last year he was in the championship hunt for a long time, apart from that little fade sort of towards the end in the last few races. But I think Ericsson sort of over the winter, he seems to have grown even further, as he has done every year since he came to IndyCar.
Yeah, one of the things he had mentioned he worked on quite a bit with his crew, engineers, was qualifying in particular, and trying to just qualify better, because like you and I have seen with IndyCar over the last few years in particular, since the talent level has just risen so much, qualifying has become just so important, and even just trying to get into the top 10 is extremely crucial for, if you want to have a chance at podium or win in IndyCar. It's like you really have to get into the fast 12 or even fast 6 in quali, or else it's just forget about it. Like that's the level of talent. I mean, you and I have witnessed for, I would say, the last 5 years, Jeroen, how much it's really just grown, and then over the last maybe 2-3 years, it's just been even more so.
Yeah, I would definitely think so. I think part of it is that we've had a really strong generation come up from the road to Indy. The Patos, the Colton Hertas, the Rinus VKs. We've just had a lot of strong drivers coming up. David Malukas, of course, in recent years, and Kyle Kirkwood. On top of that, you have quite a few Formula 2 drivers who have discovered, like, okay, maybe F1 isn't doable, but I can sort of have a look at IndyCar. So we have quite a big F2 contingent now. We mentioned Islet, but we also have Lundgaard. We also have, there's a few other ones that have made the jump in recent years. And at the same time, the people, the veterans who really have that staying power, the Dixons and the Paginots and the Powers, they just stick around and they still can perform. And I think in a way, they must also develop almost sort of to, keep that performance level up in order to still be able to compete for wins. Whereas I think some other drivers maybe who sort of over the last few years have sort of fallen by the wayside. I think they maybe just couldn't really keep up with the higher level of competition anymore. Yeah,
because Will was even talking about when does he think about retiring, and it's kind of like, well, the younger generation that's come into IndyCar, the level of talent that they are bringing, he said is for him, he's really having to like go to another level with his driving just so he can sort of stay ahead. And when you hear a driver like Will Power say something like that, then you know the level of competition that's going on in IndyCar at the moment is absolutely off the charts. Interesting off-track stuff with IndyCar because the crowd, the attendance. I believed I read it was getting close to about 250,000 fans coming to the track for the weekend, which would be a record for this race. But over the past few seasons, we've seen IndyCar start to really go up in terms of audience attendance and then also viewership as well. Jeroen, this has to do, I think, a lot with, the Drive to Survive effect. And then also you add on top of that, more people watching F1 and Drive to Survive. They're then starting to look for other forms of motor racing, which is also taking them to IndyCar. And then also it helps if, you have a driver like Romain Grosjean, who has such a big following, also going over. And then same goes with quite a few of the other drivers that are from Europe coming over and racing in IndyCar as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also an additional factor is the younger audiences, the younger generations who are, let's call them the TikTok generation, who sort of are also realizing that sort of there is something out there in America that is actually quite good. Yeah, it's not F1, but it looks a lot like F1. Actually, it's a lot more competitive. It's often a lot more spectacular. And it's becoming almost a little bit like this, this hidden secret sort of like, if you know, you know. And I think especially with the aforementioned jump of a few European drivers, a more and growing international contingent of drivers, I think that broadens the audience as well. So I mean, there are some good signals there, I think, and now I just hope sort of that IndyCar can pounce and sort of benefit from that, and build on that momentum that is definitely there, I think.
The viewership was also pretty good for the race. I think it was around 1.2 million viewers, which is really good. It's down 1.4 million from the previous year. But that being said, that's a good number for North America. What it did in Canada, that's uncertain at this moment. What was it like for yourself? I mean, from a Dutch perspective, like what I guess what level of appetite does IndyCar have with people over in Europe?
I mean, it's still, of course, in Holland, first there is F1 and Max Verstappen, and then there's a long time there's nothing, and then the rest comes, sort of. So, I mean, IndyCar, of course, is still, in a way, a sort of a niche interest, but, of course, in recent years it has grown a lot with the arrival of Rinus VK, with Rinus VK also, getting some success, winning a race, getting pole positions and so on, doing well at Indy. And I know actually that last Sunday, I mean, we're a football mad country. I think you call it soccer over there.
Yep.
And there was a Spanish football match on. And actually that drew less viewers than the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg, which to me, that's quite something. So, and all those people who tuned in, they actually saw a good race. So hopefully they'll tune in again for the next one. And that way, again, you're slowly but surely building that momentum. So, like I say, I mean, there's definitely sprouts of green.
Which I'm hoping the 100 Days to Indy, which is IndyCar's docu-series that they're working on at the moment, will air on CW and also Vice in other parts of the world. Still unsure as to where everything will be airing in total with this docu-series. It's supposed to be similar to a Formula One Drive to Survive type deal. My thing is with this is that if it gets done properly and it doesn't it doesn't get too censored or edited down, they could have a really good product on their hands, because there's a lot of characters in this series, Jeroen.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially Connor Daly has been pretty outspoken about that on his own podcast. Like, it's okay if, there is some conflict. Show the conflict, because to be honest, I mean, that's of course what Drive to Survive does as well. And to be fair, I mean, if you're a proper F1 fan and you really follow it closely, you know that some of the storylines in Drive to Survive have been, edited a little bit for entertainment value. But, you could do that here as well. And like you say, I mean, I think sort of it would be great if maybe somebody at NBC could sort of, if we have an intro of an IndyCar race, rather than showing cars, show me the personalities, show me the drivers, like F1 does sort of in their new intro sequence, right? You get familiar with the drivers, you get familiar with the names, you get familiar with the faces. And then indeed sort of, I mean, we just talked about Canapino. I mean, there's other guys, Stingray Rob. I mean, during media days, I mean, we had a great conversation with Stingray Rob. That kid has a great story.
Yeah, he does.
So, I mean, and there's so many more of them sort of that they're just great personalities. And I think sort of that's really something that the sport could leverage much more than they do at the moment.
And you can see even in their TV interviews following either qualifying or the race itself. Like I remember, I think it was Renus after qualifying. He was almost going to swear his head off on live television. He kind of had to like pull back a bit.
He was not happy with Alex Palou. No. But that's okay. I mean, show that, and that's really, really good. And sort of, not everything has to be negative energy, right?
Yeah.
Not everything has to be conflict. I mean, well, David Malukas, another great example.
Yeah.
David is a great guy, really a great guy, super funny, super engaging. I mean, use that. I mean, I can Will Power, Will Power's a great guy. Scott McLaughlin's a great guy, and so on. I mean, there's a lot more there, sort of to be like I say, to be leveraged and to be mined. And like I say, I'm not sure if we're here in Europe if we're going to get the 100 Days to Indy documentary at all. But I hope that the makers realize what potential gold they have in their hands.
Yeah, because right now IndyCar obviously is focused so much on North America, and it was brought up to other drivers as well. Seeing as how it's the series itself is starting to be on the rise again in North America and in Canada. They were asked about where would you want to go race, and some of them said Mexico, some of them said Sweden, some of them said Holland, some of them said over in Europe somewhere. So it's you can see that there is an appetite. There's like certain pockets. I mean, Marcus Ericsson had. Did you see those guys following Marcus Ericsson around?
I did. Yes.
It's his own like fan group. I believe everyone comes from Sweden, and then they follow him around to certain races, and then they kind of go home, and then they come back. But these guys were all over TV. They're all over Marcus, and I guess he.
And this is the thing, right? I mean, of course, there's always sort of like economic and financial realities, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
We know that IndyCar is not the richest racing series on the planet. We know that the number of the numbers that sort of go around in terms of revenue are not nearly the same as Formula One. But I mean, a race in Mexico doesn't seem completely undoable to me. I mean, Pato has a great fan base. And then, I mean, if at some point, maybe in a few years from now, a little European tour could be doable. I know that sort of, I mean, you know, the Swedes, they have Rosenqvist and Ericsson. In Holland, I mean, you know, if you organize a race there, I mean, people will come.
Oh, definitely. For sure.
If you you know, market it and promote it right. I mean, maybe you do a race in France, sort of, for the Grosjean fan base and the Pagenaud fan base, because I mean, we have all these nationalities, so why not sort of use that? And then sort of, if you all do it sort of in one tour, so you only have to travel once, right? So you just sort of make it like, I don't know, 3 weeks, 3 races, something like that. I think it's worth exploring. And again, I realize sort of that also, you know, the partners and the sponsors, most of them are North American. I understand all that. But there is a potential growth market outside of the US as well for this product, because that's in the end what it is. It's a great entertainment product.
Yeah, I remember dating myself here, but going back to the split that ended up being IRL and Champ Car, which was formerly known as IndyCar, and then trying to, just as a junior driver like myself, trying to navigate your way through that was so difficult, because the series was, both series, just on their knees. Like, it had gutted the fan base. There was nothing really left to leverage from the series at all, and they were doing everything they could just to hang on. And then once everything kind of came full circle again and regrouped and rebranded as IndyCar again, and we've been over the years having this slow, it's been a very long time, but it's been a slow progression to try and get back to where it was. Some folks feel that they may never get back to those golden days, but I don't know. I mean, like, at the Toronto Indy last year, like, that's the busiest I have seen that race, and I've raced in it like a long time, and for many years I've never seen it. I hadn't seen it that busy since the 90s. Like, it was rammed. And then that leads me to believe that if you're going outside of the United States, you're coming to Canada and you're getting success there. And, you know, I remember going to Mexico when Champ Car raced there. And I believe, I'm trying to remember, we had Michel Jourdain Jr., and I think Mario Dominguez was there as well. And we were racing on the same track as F1 races at for that Champ Car event. And I'm going back, I think like 2005, maybe 2004. It was rammed, man. It was packed. Like, that stadium all along that front straightaway that leads you down to turn one, it was filled. There had to have been at least 200,000 fans there for that. And that was at a time when, you know, Champ Car was like really struggling, like the series itself. So I think it just shows, like, you could go to these other venues. You could go to these other countries. No,
and that's the thing. And I mean, you know, I'm not sure how it would be in Sweden, but I know the Dutch sort of, I mean, they're absolutely sports crazy. I mean, I've been to the first Dutch Grand Prix, which was last year.
Oh yeah, you were at that, that's right.
The year in 21 actually, which was sort of the first time since the mid 80s. And the place was absolutely packed. And mind you, we were still in the middle of a pandemic, so we had all sorts of, like, you know, checkups and what have you. But the place was packed. The place was sold out. Last year it was even bigger, because we were back to full capacity. And again, I mean, if you brand it properly, if you promote it properly, if you have a good sort of a few support races around it, I mean, it's going to see IndyCar at Zandvoort. I mean, I think that would be cool, spectacular.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I really think so.
Mark Miles gave a State of the Union sort of speech on Saturday afternoon. It was pretty interesting to hear from him and to hear some of their ideas, and it was pretty transparent, which was really nice to hear from one of the faces of IndyCar, the IndyCar property and the IndyCar brand. He made mention of something that I found quite interesting. You may have a little more insight into it than I do, but the winner's circle payout, which is given to teams at the end of the season, and they basically, Mark had to, and I'm summarizing all this very quickly, Mark had to go around to the teams and convince them to give up some of the winners' circle prize money so they could then take that and invest it back into marketing for the series, which I think is a good idea. It's interesting to see that all the teams play ball with that. It's about 150,000 and it was about over 3 million, I think, for money that they are going to be able to invest in marketing for the series, which is something, Jeroen, they actually have never really done. And this is something we always talk about, is how are they branding the series, and then how are they marketing it, and then how are they executing on that. So far, things seem pretty positive on that front.
Well, at least there's an ambition to do something. I think by the way, we need to give a hat tip to Racer.com and Marshall Pruitt, who I think first reported that story about the leader circle reduction a few weeks ago. But yeah, I mean, in a way, sort of, I mean, I can understand if you're a team, sort of, and it's a request that came pretty late, sort of in preseason, right? So all of a sudden, if you're Andretti, you have 4 cars, so you suddenly need to fight $600,000 somewhere else to run your cars. But still, I mean, if it's then being used to put sort of a better marketing plan in place, then, you know, maybe it could actually pay off. I think they just launched a new marketing campaign called Zero, and around St. Pete they focused on the, you know, you can make 0 mistakes around there if you want to win. The irony, of course, was that they used Scott McLaughlin in there, who ended up in the tire barriers. But at least, sort of, it's a campaign and a concept that makes sense to me. It focuses on the driver, it focuses on the personality, because the idea is, I think, that at each race where they're going to use this, they're going to have a driver sort of with a link to that particular event tell the story. To me, it makes miles more sense than Defy Everything, because I think we talked about that earlier on podcasts. I never understood what Defy Everything was supposed to tell me, who it was supposed to appeal to. I never understood it, and I think a lot of people didn't. So they canned that. They got a new concept, which I thought looked pretty good. I'm very curious to see sort of how the future installments will be. And what else they will come up with. I mean, you know, the 100 Days to Indy is another good example. I mean, yes, I mean, we've been talking about that for years, following the success of Drive to Survive. Should IndyCar do something similar? Okay, now we're doing that. Okay, so what's next? What else are we going to do on social presence? And so on and so on. So, of course, you know, these things take time. I think they've been they're at least recruiting, or at least have been recruiting, a new head of marketing as well. So there's a change atop the organization as well. So I mean, yeah, things are changing, things are moving, and I think that is that's a good sign. And like I say, I'm curious to see sort of what's next. I'm just going to turn on the light, by the way, because the evening is falling here in Europe.
We'll talk about the junior series. I didn't get to watch any of it, but I know obviously you cover it as well with Feeder Series America on Twitter. Indy Next, it was pretty wild. I mean, obviously, Andretti Autosport had a rough Sunday in IndyCar. I heard that things didn't go very well in Indy Next.
I think Andretti just had a rough Sunday. Period.
Yeah. God.
I mean, they had 8 cars in St. Petersburg, and I think in the end there was one that sort of made it to the end.
Wow.
In a decent way. No, I mean it was rough. I mean, Louis Foster was very good, the British driver, sort of who won the USF Pro 2000 championship last year. You know, got the scholarship, moved up, signed with Andretti. Had the pole position, but you know, got caught up in one of the many incidents, because as with the IndyCar race, the Indy Next race was a bit of a precursor. It was equally chaotic, a lot of incidents, a lot of yellows. So Louis Foster dropped out. You had James Rowe, who had a technical issue. Jamie Chadwick, the 3-time W Series champ. We know she's on the steep learning curve. She knows she's on the steep learning curve. I think she went through 3 front wings during the race. Did make it to the end, finished, but you know, still has a lot to learn, clearly. And then the only one, actually, Hunter McElroy, who is sort of their championship contender. But he began the weekend very badly, because on Friday in first practice, he on one of these new bumps on the repace, he sort of lost the car, crashed into the wall. So, yeah, as a result of that, also didn't have a great qualifying, but then during the race really fought himself back to P5, so limited the damage a bit there. So who really had a good weekend in the opposite is HMD Motorsports. Of course, they provide approximately half the field, because they have a total of 9 cars. Yes, 9. And I think 7 of those finished in the top 10, including Daniel Frost, who won the race. So HMD had a good day, and another one I think who we should mention is Abel Motorsports. Jacob Abel had a great weekend. Just missed out on pole, just missed out on the win, but in the end got a podium finish. Really mixed it up with the Andretti's, with the HMD cars, as one of the smaller teams. So very impressive showing by Abel.
And I'll jump over to USF Pro because Miles Rowe had a phenomenal weekend, winning on Sunday, and then was it fourth on Saturday?
Third. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he got 2 podiums. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, last year he was in USF 2000 with Pabst Racing. Pabst Racing, a maker of champions in the lower series for many years. And he just missed out on the championship last year, but still going to graduate to USF Pro this year. Especially on Sunday. I mean, he started 5th and basically worked his way up to the front and never looked back and won the race in imperious way. And it's quite, I mean, he's a rookie in USF Pro 2000, but I mean, he has adapted to that car without any issues, clearly. Leads the championship now, heading into the next round in Sebring. Very, very impressive performance by Miles Rowe.
Because there's a ton of talent in that USF Pro series, isn't there? Like a lot from Europe as well. Like there's
definitely.
It's a pretty stacked field.
They got 20 cars on the grid, which is the biggest grid they've had in many years. There as well, just like in IndyNext. IndyNext had 19 cars. I mean, we haven't seen that in years. We all remember the single digits years of only a few years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So. And now all the Lefida series, all of them have around 20 cars on the grid, and USF Pro especially. I think there's a bit of a Louis Foster effect. I think a lot of drivers in Europe saw Louis Foster win the championship at his first attempt there last year, and we're like, this might be interesting, especially if your budget is a bit smaller.
Yeah.
Because if you want to go to F3 or F2, we're talking millions. USF Pro, then we're talking maybe $650,000, $700,000. That's slightly more doable if you have a smaller budget. A good example is Reese Ushijima, the Japanese-American driver who drove in F3. Didn't have a budget to return to F3. Instead, took the budget that he had and went to USF Pro and joined Jay Howard. So, I mean, there's a lot of guys who used to be in F3, a few who even used to be in F2, from GB3, the British Formula Regional Championship. So, I mean, there's a lot of talent there. And then, of course, some guys who came up from the USF 2000, like homegrown talent. And that all combines to make a very, very strong field. All that actually makes Miles Rowe's performance even more impressive.
And for those of you listening, if you want to find out more about a lot of the junior category that Jeroen is speaking of, you can find out more on Feeder Series America on Twitter. Jeroen, let everybody know what you got going on and where they can find you on social media.
Well, yeah, Feeder Series Americas, I think, is the most relevant for most people. And then I got my personal handle also at Mr. Demmendaal. What I'll be doing, I'll just keep on following F1, F2, F3, IndyCar, Road to Indy, all of that. Watching a lot of motor racing.
Jeroen, thanks very much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.